Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kitchen Table Classroom. My name is Emily Paulson, and I'm with the Edmonton Public Library.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm happy to start us off with a little bit about the Kitchen Table Classroom, which is a session you're joining tonight. This is a special series in partnership between Calgary Public Library and Edmonton Public Library that we began at the beginning of COVID, so it's been almost 2 years already. Tonight's session is all about helping your child learn to read who's in grades 3 to 6. So without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our speakers tonight. Michelle Bence's passion is early literacy. She's an enthusiastic educator with over 18 years of teaching experience. Miriam Ramzy is the Director of Student Learning for a leading school division here in Alberta. The focus of her education, teaching practice, and professional development has been on early learning and literacy. Miriam has her PhD from the University of Calgary. I know that you will enjoy their presentation and looking forward to your questions in the Padlet. Take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone. And to Kate and Emily, thank you for such a warm welcome. We are very excited to be here with you tonight. So our topic today is all about supporting your child at home with that reading progress or that reading process for grade 3 to grade 6 children. And so we hope that after our hour together, you leave with some great strategies and tools and ideas for you to do in a really fun, playful way with your children or the children in your care. We love to offer just some pictures that give you a sneak peek into our lives when we present. And if you were here with us for our K-2 session, you would recognize these pictures. But if not, we felt we had to share them again because we love them so much. And the images that we choose to share oftentimes relate to the topic that we're speaking to. And as you can see, our images really speak to building a love and joy of reading and of books. So my picture is on the left. It's my husband, Mike, and our dog, Ellie. And this is not a posed picture. It was just a picture that I came upon, or a setting I came upon, and I snapped a picture of quickly, where my husband is reading to our dog. And what I love about this picture, and what I love to share about this picture, is these are the experiences we want to build with our children. That shared gaze. They're looking at the same thing. They have a shared touch. It's a shared experience that sparks joy and that love of books and love of reading, which we hope to foster for children throughout all of their schooling careers. And I'll let Michelle jump in and introduce herself and speak to her picture.
Thanks, Miriam. So I'm Michelle. As Kate introduced us, have been a teacher for many years in the Calgary area, and I am currently at the University of Calgary doing my PhD. And what you see on your screen on the right-hand side is a picture of my family. And just like Miriam, it is not staged. I snapped this picture on Christmas Eve about a year ago. And again, it's the same thing that Miriam talked about. You see that shared gaze, you see that physical connection, that love of reading. And I particularly like this because a lot of times, Miriam and I hear that parents don't read to their children after a certain age, right? They think, oh, well, they're starting to read on their own now. Now I don't read to my child. And yet here are my kids who are well beyond elementary school, and they still love to be read to because of that connection, because of that love and the connection it fosters. So that's hopefully we'll give you some tips and tricks tonight to create that same kind of connection in your own home. So that is going to be our focus tonight. We are going to talk about tips and tricks for reading development, both through times when your child is reading to you, as well as times when you are reading to your child. They are both critical for reading development. So we'll go through that in quite a bit of depth and detail. So let's take a little bit of a step back. Just very quickly, we are going to talk about what reading really looks like. And this is a big bird's eye view. So reading is incredibly complex. So to simplify it, we've broken it into these sort of what I call the 3 bubbles, or these 3 pieces that we know all readers need. And it not only do they need, but they actually interact. So these 3 pieces interact, and it's sort of what we call a reciprocal process. So They kind of interact, pull and push on each other, and the best readers do this in a constant fashion. So the first thing that we know readers need is that what we are calling word recognition. That is just being able to get the words off the page. When you see that word, can I identify the letters, the sounds, push them together, and actually read the word? But equally important, and by the way, Miriam is going to take you through some strategies to support your reader in helping them with that word recognition and very specific ideas and tips and tricks. Just as important, language comprehension. What that means is it's not enough just to read the word, but we have to make sense of the word and how that word lives with other words on the page. So we call that language comprehension. And I'm going to take you through a number of strategies that help to support the reader in making sense of the text. And no less important as well, there's a third bubble, and we call that engagement. And that means that the reader, they have to do this really complex task, which means they need focus, they need motivation to read, they need to persist when things get tough, and we know that they get tough. So we need all of these bubbles to work together to make a skilled reader. So we will take you through some tips and tricks that will hopefully support all three of these different bubbles. And again, just to confirm, we are going to do this through two different methods. That is, we're going to address those bubbles through both when your child reads to you and when you read to your child. And a lot of the tips and tricks overlap between those, so they can use for both when the child's reading and when you're reading to your child. And the final thing that we will leave you with is this quote on the side of the slide. I won't read it, but really what it does is it summarizes this idea that reading is very complex. We know that good readers take all of those complex skills and they employ them at the same time. And they are constantly checking, am I using these skills? Does it make sense? Checking back and forth. And when things go off the rails, when things start, they go, whoa, that doesn't make sense. They actually are able to stop, recognize it, stop, and then go back and fix their understanding. So we hope that you leave tonight with some strategies to help support your child in doing that. All right, I think Miriam, you are up.
Thank you, Michelle. I just will note one other quick item. Hopefully this isn't too overwhelming, but we also built just an online folder with quite a few resources for you. And we will go through those at the end, time permitting. But I would ask our library facilitators to post that link. It's called a bit.ly link. And what it will take you to is a folder with actually, I'll show you. It will take you to a folder that looks like this. And what you are looking for is our 3 to 6 session. And in there, we have our slides. So don't feel you need to be taking pictures or manically writing notes. I just wanted to let you know you have access to these slides and you're welcome to use them. These files will remain permanent in this folder, so you can go back to them at other occasions. So I just wanted to speak to that quickly, and I believe the bit.ly has been posted in the chat. So with that, let's dig into tip and trick or strategy number 1. So what are some strategies that you can do as parents to help your children get those words off the page, read those words? And you'll see some of the examples that we've used are from picture books, but know that this speaks to working in a chapter book, working with a picture book, when you're reading to your child, when your child is reading to you, in all instances. So number 1, to help your child get those words off the page, to decode or sound out those words, one strategy to start with is working on teaching letters and letter sounds, which in the academic world or the teaching world, we call phonics. And so we have just some tips and tricks on the slide for you to consider. Number 1, when your child is reading to you, we really want to prompt them to focus on the letters. And so I'll show you an example of what this could look like. So let's say your child is reading, this is the important book. Let's say they are reading the important book and they get to this page and they read that first sentence as, the important thing about grass is that it is grew. This is something you could say, oh, great, try. Now let's look at that word together and try and figure it out. What sounds do you recognize? And it's likely if you have older children, grade 3 to grade 6, they know all those letters and they know the corresponding sound. So it's just about turning them back into that word. Let's look at it together. Make it a shared experience. And let's say the sounds together. G, r, in. What word does that make? Green. So let's read it again together. The important thing about grass is that it is green. So as much as possible, as Michelle spoke to, we really want to tune students' eyes and their processes while they're reading to really pay attention to the letters on the page. And if you have, if your own child or you have younger children, maybe they struggle with this, so they need a little bit more practice with those letter sound connections, we have some links for you right on the slide. So number one, some pronunciation guides. This can be quite tricky, whether you're a native English speaker or not. When I shifted from teaching French immersion to grade 1 English, as odd as it sounds, I did need to relearn all of those consonant and vowel sounds in English because English is very complex. It is tricky to learn. So if you need any support, any pronunciation guides, we have 2 examples there, one PDF link and one video, as well as that third link are some activities. So if you're looking for some fun ways to help your child work on these letter sound connections, there's a great tool there with a ton of ideas for you. Now, something else that you can do is to help your child look for, we would say, little words that you might know, or look inside a word to see if there's any parts that you recognize. So this is another page in the same book, The Important Book. And let's say your child is reading and they get down here and say, and it does not taste like, and they just don't know. It's a big word. They're a little unsure. Remember, we're really targeting or focusing in on those letters. Something you could say is, oh, I see you're not sure about that word. That's okay. Let's see if we recognize any smaller words in there. And so we would look at it nice and close, and maybe your child would say, oh, I see the word any, which is a word that can stand all on its own. Do you have any grapes? And then there's the word thing, another one that can stand on its own. So if my child isn't able to pick out those smaller words inside, that's okay. I'm going to show them to them. I'm going to point really close and say, those first 3 letters, A-N-Y, that's actually a word. It's any. And the last part is thing. Let's put that together. Anything, anything. And we would read it again. So as much as possible, we really want to cue students as they're reading to focus on the letters on the page. Another support, especially if you have older students, to work on this is actually training or working with syllables. And syllables are small units of pronunciation. I know it's an odd definition. I'll give you some examples, but the important thing to know about syllables in the English language is that each syllable has to have a vowel, and that's something we teach children. So syllables, they can be 1 syllable to multi-syllables. An example could be the word dog. Dog, that's 1 unit of pronunciation or sound. That's 1 syllable. But doggy or puppy, that has 2 syllables, doggy. Some more complex ones could be, crocodile, or for older subjects, democracy, 4 syllables. One thing we want to do is teach children syllables, and we do that really well in the classroom. The other piece is to teach the different types of syllables. And in the English language, there are actually quite predictable, 6 quite predictable types of syllables. And those 6 syllables types are on the screen there. There's also a link where it says click here to take you to a PDF if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them to describe the 6 different types. And I'm not going to go into much detail about this today. We could spend an hour just on syllable types and training syllables, but I wanted to give you a quick strategy. And I want to mention the first two types of syllables. They're the easiest to learn. They're closed syllables and open syllables. So a closed syllable, and it explains it right here on the screen, is one unit, so cat, one syllable, that ends in what we call our consonants. So not a vowel, but a consonant. And generally, closed syllable, so one syllable that ends in a consonant. The vowel in the middle is something we call a short vowel sound. Those are the most common vowels in English. If you're not sure what those are, on that previous slide, you can go to that pronunciation guide so that you know what it should sound like. And then the next most common are called open syllables. They are the exact opposite. They are syllables then that actually end in, not a consonant, but a vowel. And a syllable that ends in a vowel, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. The vowel actually says its name. That's called a long vowel. So go, G, O. That O is saying its name. So that is an open syllable. As I said, we're not going to go into these in too much detail, but I wanted to share with you a really simple way to help your children work with syllables. It's a 4-step method and it's quick. This is what you can do together. So if you're reading a book, and I'll show you an example on the next slide, and your child encounters a word that has multiple syllables, it's just a little bit tricky for them. 4 things to do. Number 1, grab a piece of scrap paper. Maybe you have a whiteboard from the dollar store and write it out for them. Step number 2 is together underline those vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. And then as you start to learn about those 6 different syllable types, you'll start to notice the patterns and you'll be able to actually divide up the word based on the different types of syllables. I'll give you a handful of examples. And then once you have that done, you're going to read the word together. So what does this look like? Let's say you're reading this page from the important book, and you'll see I've underlined a few of the words that have multiple syllables. Might be tricky, but we're going to start with an easy one. So my child gets to this word ticklish, and they're really struggling. There's a lot of letters there to sound it all out. It's a lot. So I'm going to grab my piece of paper, my little sticky or my scrap paper I have, and I'm going to write it out, and we'll copy it from the book together. So Ticklish. Step number 2, underline those vowels. So we pick out those 2, the I and the I. And the reason we want to underline those vowels is, again, because every syllable needs to have a vowel. And based on the length of this word, my guess is there's going to be 2 syllables. And then what we're going to do is look for a group of what we say are consonants. So the letters that don't include the vowels. And generally, when you have a group of consonants, so we have C, K, and L in the middle of the word, the syllable divides someplace in there. So we know for ticklish, it goes between the K and the L. So now your child, rather than having to read that whole word of 8 letters, are reading 2 small words and then putting them together. Tick, and ish, ticklish. Here's another example, yellow. So write it out for your child. You're going to together underline the 2 vowels. Another tip or trick for you, if there's ever a word where in the middle there are the same consonants, the same letters, almost always you can divide up that word right down the middle. And so what we see here, this consonant and this syllable ends in a consonant. Again, it's a closed consonant. It says that short vowel E sound. So we have yell. And then the second syllable here, there's an O. And especially with older students, they would know OW, oftentimes at the end of the word, says the O sound. So we have yell, low, yellow. And so we're breaking those words into short, readable, meaningful parts that just help with that reading process. I'm going to skip the last example just because of the time and get to the third piece to help your children get those words off the page is to teach something called sight words. And sight words are words that occur all the time. We see them frequently in text. And what's tricky about them is so many of them can't be sounded out. And there's a link here that you can click on if you're looking for a list. And here's a really quick way to help your child not memorize, but automatically recognize sight words. We use the see, say, write process, where you are going to write the word on a piece of paper, you're going to show it to your child, and you're going to read it to them so that your child is seeing the word and they're hearing it. Next, your child is going to point to the word and say it. So if it's the word can, they're then going to point to it and say can and name the letter C-A-N. And then they're going to write the word. So C-A-N on a piece of paper and read it again, can. And that's a great strategy. There's also a link at the bottom, or a link, sorry, right here. This list of sight words also has some great activities that you can do alongside the see, say, write process. And these are just a handful of other examples of sight words. And the last thing is all about focusing on meaning. So number one, we were talking about how to help your child get the words off the page. And when you think back to those 3 bubbles Michelle spoke to, that is a huge support for decoding words. But we know there's 2 other big pieces for becoming a skilled reader. That second big piece is language comprehension, understanding words. So in addition to really helping your child pay attention to the text, we also want to help them pay attention to what's happening in the story and making what we say sense, or comprehending the text. And 2 quick strategies here for you is we want to encourage children to use the context. So to use all of the words on the page, what they know about the book, some of the visuals, the pictures, to understand. So if your child is reading this book and they say, or they read, the important thing about snow is that it is, and instead of white, they say which. Jump in and say, that's interesting. Does that make sense? The important thing about snow is that it is which. So we're cueing them to think about what they're reading. And then we might say, let's look back at the letters and try and sound it out together. Or if you're reading Olivia and your child reads, Olivia gets dripped. She has to try on everything. I'd go through the same process. That's interesting. Does that make sense? Olivia gets dripped. And maybe this time I say, let's look at the pictures together. What do you notice? What's Olivia doing? We'll have conversation that hopefully leads to the word dripped, or dressed, not dripped. And then we would read the sentence again. There is something that we've built here, a bookmark that's in your bit.ly link. We won't look at it today, or we won't look at it right now. Instead, I'm actually going to pass it over to Michelle with just a quick reminder as you're working on this with your children. Focus on the positive, praise the positive, have fun. This needs to be an enjoyable experience because learning to read, it is hard. And so the more enjoyable we can make it and the more positive we can make it for our children, the better.
Thanks, Miriam. Okay, so she talked a lot about those word recognition strategies and how to support that word recognition. We are now sort of going to shift our focus into that language comprehension. So we know the purpose of reading is to make sense of the text. So it is very important that we help our children understand that that's why we're reading, to make sense of the text. And there are many strategies that we can embed to help and support that reading development and that understanding. We also know that good readers have conversations with the text. That means inside their head, they're always reading the text and comparing it to what they know and thinking about what they know and thinking about their opinions about what they're reading. It's sort of this back and forth conversation going on. So we really need our children to be having those same conversations to make sense. And we can do that before, during, and after. We want those conversations to go on through the entire reading process. Now, here's the good news. That is that so much of that learning about having that conversation can go on through talk. We can set that precedent. We can help our students understand that, or our children understand that through talk. So we want to do that again before, during, and after. So let's take a look at that before reading. Now, if you think about a conversation, to really get into that conversation, I want to be thinking about the topic. before I even start reading. I want to be engaged and excited. So we want to create that anticipation. Think about, I wonder what this is going to be about. I wonder what's going to happen in this story. So creating that anticipation and purpose is really important. The other thing it does is it focuses that child's attention. Remember, that's part of that engagement piece, right? It's focusing their attention on a certain topic. It's sort of narrowing, what am I going to be thinking about? What do I need to be thinking about as I read this text? We can do that through lots of different strategies. Great ones are looking at the pictures, looking at the book summary. As your student starts to read higher levels, or your child reads higher levels, they get those book summaries at the back of the book. Read them and then have a conversation even before they open that text. Again, pictures are great. And then start a conversation around it. Oh, I think this book's going to be about. I wonder if the character is going to. Ask your child those questions, right? To get that conversation going. The other thing that it does is we need to activate background knowledge. Because remember, if they're going to have a conversation where inside their head they're comparing what they know to what the text is saying, we really want them to start with something. We want them to start with some knowledge to be able to compare to. So again, point out key pictures in the book that you think will come up, or key words that are going to come up again and again in the book. Another great strategy, look for titles or headings. So if you're reading a nonfiction book like the one on the screen that has a table of contents, this is a fantastic place to go, because I just as an adult have to read through those words with my child, the different headings in that table of contents, and all of a sudden we have a whole different perspective of what's going to be in this book. I've activated all of that information inside my head, and I'm starting to think inside my head, I wonder what it's going to say about parks. Wonder what it's going to say about the type of animals that live in those parks. So that can be great. Or if your child's getting into those small beginning chapter books, flip through it and look at the chapter headings. Again, they can make some predictions about where this book is going to go, what's going to happen to the character. Finally, activate vocabulary. So again, look at that national parks book. And you're probably thinking, I bet ecosystem is a word in that book because it's going to talk about all these different parks. So don't be afraid to highlight that word even before your child reads the whole book. Stop and talk about, what is an ecosystem? How do you think this relates to the different parks or the different forests? And do you remember when we went to Banff? And that was its own ecosystem too. What kind of things did we see? So have those conversations to set that anticipation, that purpose, and activate that background knowledge. All right, so let's look at during the reading. So we want that conversation going on. Another thing that we know about what good readers do is really, as they make sense of the text, what they're doing is they're constructing models inside their head about the information that they're reading about. So they have a model and then they read a little bit of information and they're adding to their model, or they're changing up that model a little bit, or they're actually stopping and saying, oh, wait a minute. What I just read does not match my model at all. That's really critical. It's called monitoring for meaning. Here's what we know. We know that good readers constantly monitor for meaning. They're always going back and forth with their own model and the text and what they're reading and saying, does that fit? Do I need to change my model? Or, whoa, do I need to stop because I thought we were reading about farms and horses and I just read something about hammers. So maybe I need to stop and go back and reread. Struggling readers don't do that as easily. So we need to make sure that we're prompting students to actually go back and check in with those mental models. How do we do that? Think alouds are amazing. So what a think aloud is simply when an adult verbalizes their thinking. That's because, again, young children don't tend to have those conversations as much as adults. When we read naturally, we tend to have a lot of conversations. Young children, not so much. So we can model that out loud by showing them what we are thinking. Oh, I wonder why the character did that. That surprised me. I'm going to have to really think closely what happens next and see if it explains why the character did that, right? I'm making my thinking visible, and then the child hears that and they start to think about their own strategies, their own conversations and questions they need to be asking. So again, this also helps that child monitor for meaning. So when it gets to a point where, oh, wait a minute, that totally does not fit what I was thinking or where I thought the story was going, I need to stop and I need to go back and reread again so I can check that I'm on the right track. So questioning, really important. And we know that actually we can prompt children to ask 3 types of questions when they are reading, during their reading. So we like to call them quiz show questions. Those are questions that are right off the page. You can answer them. You can find that information on the page. So here I have an excerpt of I Survived. It's a series, and this one's The Sinking of the Titanic. Grade 4 kids seem to love this series. It's sort of like a historical fiction. It's a story, but it's based in real events from the past. And so I won't read the whole passage, but basically it's talking about when the Titanic hits the iceberg, right? The Titanic was sinking, the gigantic ship had hit an iceberg, land was far, far away. And then it goes on to explain the main character, 10-year-old George, is on the deck and chaos is basically going on around him. He was scared. There were people yelling. There were gunshots going off. And then I'm just going to slip down to the very bottom section where it says, some people were playing screamed, children cried, gunshots exploded across the deck, but George didn't move. Just hold on, he told himself, gripping the rail, like maybe he can hold up the ship. So a quiz show question that we want a child to be asking is, so when did this happen? It's right there on the page. April 15th, 1912 at 2 a.m. Or what happened? A gigantic ship hit an iceberg. Really easy, simple. We know kids actually ask these questions quite well. They're surface level questions. They're great. They're easy for them. However, the next set of questions, which is just as important, is what we call those Discovery Channel questions. Those are questions where we need kids to connect information on the page. So it's not in the print. It's not going to be spelled out, but I actually have to take information from somewhere on the page and add it to some other information and connect them, called inferencing. This is really important. And again, we know that kids who struggle with reading have difficulty with this skill. So this is something that we want to really ask a lot of questions and ask them to connect the information. And it may be that you have to have a conversation and talk about it with them to help them connect the dots at first. So a Discovery Channel question might be, so George didn't move. Why didn't he move? And so what the child has to do is they have to connect the fact that the ship has hit an iceberg. It's starting to sink. People are running all around him. He's terrified. He's scared. And so maybe he's in shock, or maybe he's just frozen because he doesn't know what to do. So they have to take those other pieces of the information and connect them to make that inference, which is a really important skill. The final piece is what we call talk show questions, because there's no right answer for this. It's really what I think about something, my opinion. The neat thing about these questions are that to answer them, the child has to relate it to their background knowledge. So a talk show question might be, what would you do if you were George? What would you do next? There's no right answer. But the really interesting thing is to tell you that I would run and find a lifeboat and a life jacket as fast as I could. To answer that, I have to draw on my background knowledge and connect it to the text, which is exactly what we want students to do. Okay, let's move into what do we do after reading. So we know, again, that what we want are those conversations through the whole thing. And then ultimately, when a child reads a text, we want them to be thinking about the important points that they just read, right? Again, we know that really good readers are good at, as they're reading, pulling out the important points and remembering them, filing them into this mental model that they have. However, struggling readers tend to struggle with this a little bit more. They tend to not know what are the important points of information. They kind of look at everything rather than thinking, okay, this was really important in the beginning, this was really important in the middle, so I need to remember this. So again, we can support them. We can help them with this. So when they're finished reading, we want to ask, so what happened? What happened in the book that you just read? However, again, remember, that's a really big task because they were thinking about reading, they were thinking about the words and the letters, and then they had to pull out the important points and keep them in your head and organize it. It's a lot going on. So how do we support them in this? We limit what they have to pay attention to. So, Miriam, what did you think was the most important thing at the beginning scene of that? So I would have said the Titanic hit an iceberg. That's what started this whole thing. That's one thing that they have to identify. What was really important in the middle of this story? So again, I'm focusing their attention so that they just have to deal with a little bit, and they have to sort through the facts and recall the one that they think is the most important. So it's really helping them prioritize the important information and so on. So using words to guide them. What happened first? What happened next? What happened at the end? What was the most important thing in the beginning? They're very helpful in helping the student decide what is important and what is to pay attention to when they read. Another thing that we know in terms of remembering that information and really making sense is when they connect to what they know. So again, good readers don't stop thinking about the book when they have finished reading the book. They actually continue thinking about it and how it connects to their life experiences, other books that they've read, things in their life. So we can again encourage that through conversation and think about, oh, you know what? Reading that book, The Titanic, that reminded me when we took the canoe trip down the river. Remember how we were afraid that the canoe was going to get a hole and that canoe might have tipped? I wonder if we had a hole, would it sink the same way the Titanic did? That's going to really make a robust model inside a child's head where they're reviewing the information they read, they're building it out, and they're connecting it outside of the book, which is something we need them to ultimately do. Finally, it's really helpful when we can organize that information, right? So they've created this model in their head as they were reading, but one of the things we want to do is teach them how to organize it. That actually lowers what we call the cognitive load. It lowers what they have to pay attention to, because now they have to take that information and they can flip it right into the right file or right into the organization they've already got. So texts always have patterns. So if you think of a story, it has a beginning, middle, and an end. And most stories have at the beginning the characters and the setting. In the middle, they have a problem, and in the end, they solve the problem. That's a simple pattern. If we teach children those patterns, then it helps them as they're reading. When they read new books, they can start to apply that information into that structure that they internalize. Other patterns that we see in books, things like cause and effect, right? The Titanic hit an iceberg. The effect was George had to find a way off that ship to survive. Or compare and contrast. Think about reading a book that compares spiders and scorpions, right? So if we teach them those structures or those ways of organizing information, it's very powerful for helping them organize information later on when they're also when they're reading new text. And we can attach words to that too. So if you think about cause and effect words, think of because. Why did the Titanic sink? Because it hit the iceberg. It was a cause and effect. Or if the Titanic didn't hit the iceberg, would it have sank? How would that change the story? Cause and effect, right? Similarities and differences work compare and contrast. What is the same about scorpions and spiders? What's different? So thinking about that and connecting it to the language that we use. All right, the next one is vocabulary. Oh, and sentence starters. So this is just a simple one. Remember, we've said that all of this can be done through talk, both talk around a text that your child is reading and talk around a text that you're reading to your child. So you'll have this in your PDF resource, and it's just a number of great question starters. So I wonder about, or oh, now I understand. So how did I change my mental model when I started to read and add information? They're great to just have there to help you. So I think the next one is vocabulary. So this is a big one. Vocabulary helps us make sense of the text. Obviously, we want to know the words on the page. We also know if we know the word that we're trying to decode or recognize, it makes it easier for us to actually decode the word. And we are more likely to remember how to decode that word the next time, right? So we remember the letter patterns better if we actually know what the word means. So vocabulary is really important, not only for making sense of the text, but also for word recognition. Here's what happens though, as students who are challenged with reading go up in the grades. We know that their vocabularies don't grow as much as students who are really prolific readers. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind, that we want to, even if our children are struggling a bit with reading, or they're not as strong as we think, or they're not prolific readers, we still want to grow their vocabularies. There's lots of ways to do that. Reading to your child is the best one. So again, another reason for why you need to read to your child even if they are readers, they probably are not reading super complex language in books, because that's the nature of early books. So by reading complex books to children, or novels to children, they hear more language, and then you can build those vocabularies. One thing about building vocabulary, though, is that we don't want to just give them the word and then throw the definition and then we're done. That doesn't work. But in fact, what we are doing is we're building really strong maps of that word, what we call semantic maps. So we want to identify a word like variable. We want to link it to a whole bunch of words that we could connect it to. And we want to look at different meanings of that word, or how it can be used in different contexts. That's really important. So when we have a strong map, then we know that child's much more likely to pull that word out again. And Miriam, if you push that button, we'll see some tricks to how to build strong maps. The very first trick is we need multiple exposures. We know that a child has to be exposed to a word at least 12 times to make it a strong link. And we need multiple contexts. We want to come back to that word again and again. We want to provide context. So when I introduce variable, I can think, oh, remember the weather yesterday? How it changed from windy to cold to sunny? It was really variable, right? So I'm introducing an experience that they've had where they can connect it to the new word. And then they have opportunities to use it again and again. And here's why, as parents, you have so much potential in this area, because parents have the opportunity to do this really well. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see all the reasons why parents are like superheroes in terms of vocabulary. Because number one, when you introduce the word, you know what your child's experiences are, you know what level they're at, you know what other words they know that connect to it. So you are intimate, you know your child intimately, right? And their vocabulary intimately. So you can really target your conversation to where it needs to be with them. You also see your child all the time. So you can repeat words with them and repeat that variable word many times. You can do it at the dinner table, then the next day you can bring it back. So again, you have that opportunity to build that vocabulary. And finally, you know the background experiences that your child has that can link really closely to that word. So pull on those experiences, make really strong connections, make a really strong word map for your child. All right, so putting it all together, I think that Miriam's going to talk about this next slide.
Yes, so we've shared 4 big strategies or tips when you're working with your child. So focusing on those words on the page, those letters, that print, focusing on meaning so that they understand and they comprehend the text. And then Michelle spoke to talking to your children and with your children before reading, while reading, after reading. And that last strategy was building vocabulary. And again, and I put it in the chat, but I want to mention that almost all of this can be done in any language. This can be done in your home language, in an additional language, in any language. And there's actually a lot of research to show that the more we work in our home language, the more it actually translates and supports the other language that your child may be learning. So don't feel that this has to be done in one particular language or English only. Not at all. This can be done in any language. So a great way to help your child, especially when we're looking at grade 3 and up, to consolidate, to show what they know and to deepen their learning, but also to support their comprehension or their ability to make sense when they're reading, is to actually have them do some writing. And writing can look a ton of different ways, but look for those opportunities for your children to extend their thinking a little bit, maybe to summarize what they wrote. And Michelle just shared some of those sentence starters or those frames for your children to use first, or the most important. Analyze or critique, talk about the good and the bad of something. I agree with this character for these reasons. I disagree with this character's actions for this other reason. And then the most difficult is to synthesize. This is tricky, and that's actually looking either across a whole book or multiple books, and kind of combining the ideas to form an opinion. These are difficult, but they are great at supporting children as they are learning to read and to comprehend text. So here are just some strategies for you, because we know writing can oftentimes be a bit of an uphill battle, especially at home. So these are just 5 simple things that you can do to support your children in writing. And again, this can be done with you. You can share the pencil, you can scribe for your child, but the more you can get them to write, the better. So the first is just to give them the start of a sentence. Maybe you write for them, I agree with the main character's action because, and your child just fills in the rest of that sentence. There are some frames or some sentence starters down here as well. You can also use something that they're called paragraph frames. So it looks like this here, where essentially children fill in the boxes. And Michelle just spoke to that vocabulary. Some of that vocabulary, that cause and effect, sequence, compare, contrast vocabulary, they're built in. So if you want, this is a summary one, you've read a whole book maybe, or a chapter with your children, they can do something like this where they have to tell you the first thing that happened, then after that what happened, following that what happened next, and then finally or in the end. And then if they want a picture. Something else that can be of support, especially for some students who are a little bit of reluctant writers who really don't want to, is actually to summarize, give the most important parts, critique, using a blank comic book page. You can find a ton of these online. You know, in six frames, I want you to show me the actions of the character that you agree with. And there is a little bit of writing, so you're building in some writing, but then there's also another way for them to show you what they know or what they understood from the book. Sometimes just a computer, giving your children the opportunity to type can be motivation enough. So you can have them type a response to a question you ask, and it can be a really simple question, you know, a 1-word or a 1-sentence response. But again, any writing can be helpful. And something that I used to do even actually with my own students is if we read a book that we loved, or there was a part of a book that we loved, oftentimes they love to turn them into almost like a play, and then they can act it out. So if they have an older sibling or a younger sibling or grandma and grandpa, they can, you know, make it a bit of a family affair where you write it out and you act it out, and there's a written component built in. And the last one I'll speak to quickly, when you think back to those 3 bubbles Michelle spoke to, working on the word recognition, comprehension, then there was also engagement. So what are some ways to motivate and engage your child into loving reading? And just some ideas on the screen here. 1, give lots of choice. So go to the library and have your child pick out 10 books, however many books. I think Kate shared last time at the library, you can take up to 99. Give them choice in what they want to read. And then when you get home, what book do you want to read first? What book do you want to read together? What book do you want me to read to you? Number 2, share the load, simply meaning maybe I'll read 1 page and you read the next page, and then I'll read the page after that, just to lessen some of that load, because reading can be really hard. So the more you can partner up and share that load together, the more it can motivate your child to continue persevering and learning to read. A similar one, chunking it. So you know what, if you read that first paragraph, I'll read the next few pages, or let's chunk this science chapter into smaller parts. So today we're going to look at section 1.1, all about whatever unit of study that your child may be looking at. Number 4, again, make it a family affair. In what ways can you encourage your family to get together and do this? Some of my fondest memories are of my mom when I was in high school and my brother was in junior high, reading Harry Potter to us. So how can you bring in the family? Maybe it's your child reading to the dog. Maybe it's grandma and grandpa coming over and reading together. But in what ways can you do this? Can you approach this task as a family? And another great way to build in some of that motivation or engagement or drive to read is to help your child get into a series. So a book series where maybe it's the same character across multiple books, and or in getting into a certain author. And for me, I loved Roald Dahl's collection of books. That was a series that I got into and I read through all of them. Maybe a challenge for you for the month of March as a family. See if you can read 10 different genres or types of books. Maybe, it's a compare and contrast books where it's looking at 2 different animals. Maybe it's a cookbook. There are some great cookbooks for kids. Maybe it's a chapter book. There are so many different genres that you can also talk to your librarians about, and they can help you pick a wide range or wide variety of books. So we will just end really quickly, just coming back to that importance of building that love of reading with your children. We want this to be an enjoyable, joyful experience. And we just wanted to share some of our favorite books that we've read with children in Division 2 classrooms. So mine is on the right here, The Billionaire's Curse by Richard Newsom. I actually read this to my grade 4 and 5 students, and they were hooked from the beginning. It was such a great read aloud. So if you have a child who's looking into a new book and it is a series, I would highly recommend The Billionaire's Curse by Richard Newsom.
Great, thanks, Miriam. And my book is The Lightning Thief. And this is an interesting one because it is one that hooked my daughter. So my daughter was a reader who struggled for various reasons. And in grade 4 or 5, her teacher read this book out loud, which she loved. And I'll just say, she didn't get hooked on the series because she read it herself. So first of all, the teacher read it to her, and then she was like, oh, Mom, I want to read all the books. Then it was still too hard for her at that moment to read all of the text. So we found it on Audible, or Libby is the public system that's free for everyone, Audible books. And so what she did is she followed along in her copy with the Audible book. And here's the thing that happened. As she listened and followed the text, she got more and more confident, and she was practicing seeing those words and mapping those words. And what ended up happening was she eventually ended up reading the entire series, and not only the entire series, but there are multiple series. Rick Riordan has multiple parts of these series, and she's read them all. So it really helped just get her hooked. And again, just hearing them and then giving her that confidence to try them on her own or read them along with the audio tape really worked. So yeah, absolutely something. It was actually quite life-changing for her. She has become a reader because of it. Okay.
All right. So the last thing we'll just let you know is in that bit.ly link that has been shared in the chat, you have, in addition to the slides, 4 documents. Number 1 are just some hints, some strategies for you as a parent to help your child if they get stuck on a word or in understanding the book. The second one is just some strategies to build new vocabulary. You know, that's a critical piece for success in school. Cheat sheet on those 3 different types of questions Michelle spoke to, and then just a summary of the reading tips that we shared today. And with that, just a humongous thank you for staying with us. We recognize that was a lot of information to share and a lot of strategies, but we just wanted to set you up for success with a wide range of choices as you work with your own children and you support them in their reading journey. So thank you so much. We recognize it is 8:30, so if you need to leave, that's okay, but we are happy to stay on for questions as well.
We'll try to go as quickly as we can through them. A lot of them are fabulous questions. I will take the first one under questions about reading in print, digital versus paper, just because this is a passion area for Miriam and I, actually. We speak a lot on this. We do know that the brain processes information differently from when you have a hard copy, so in print, versus on a screen like a tablet. So we do, in general, say, please, please, please read a hard copy, because we know the brain processes the information differently. As well, when we read on a tablet, we don't discuss as much. There have been studies, and they are fascinating, that actually you can read the exact same story. In hard copy, you spend about 3 times as much time talking about the text than when you read the exact same story on a tablet. We don't know why, but it happens, and it's been replicated many times. So for that language piece, for that understanding piece, yeah, read on paper. Really, if you can. We know it's not always possible, right? Mix it up, but whenever you can, do it on paper. Miriam, I think when reading aloud, my child often skips some words, such as the small ones, the and, the. adds words that don't exist. Sometimes they misread words. Why do these happen? And how can I help my child fix these issues? So the first thing I'll say is if they are doing that and they are still making sense, that is a strength, by the way, that they are actually not necessarily paying attention to those tiny words because they're actually reading sort of more of that global topic. But of course, we do want to address that. So I'm going to throw that one to you, Miriam.
I think you bring up a good point, Michelle. If your child understands what they're reading, then I wouldn't worry too much about this, but one strategy you could do is tracking. So depending on the age of your child, I might have them, I need you to point to the words as you read just to make sure we don't miss any, because that might impact your comprehension. You might not be able to understand the whole book. So tracking or pointing to those words as they go, that's one strategy to help with that. Any other ones to add, Michelle, or shall we jump to the next question?
Let's jump to the next one because tracking was number one on my list as well. It'll slow down their reading a little bit and help their eyes track too, which takes training, by the way. Next one, how many times should I correct my child in a 15-minute reading session? That's a tricky one. We have a golden rule as a teacher that we'd like to see when a child's reading independently, like basically we have the 5-finger rule, where we don't really want them what we call miscuing more than 5 words on a page if possible, because that's when they sort of hit this frustration level. So rather than thinking about correcting your child, if they're reading independently and you're starting to see that frustration level that we don't want them to get to, maybe back up the text a little bit, meaning just go down to a more simple text or one where they're not making as many mistakes. Miriam, do you have anything?
Yeah, or the other thing too is you could just read that page first to them and then your child could read after that, because exactly that, we want to avoid that frustration. And it depends. That 5 error rule is a great rule of thumb, 5 mistakes per page. If it's more than that, it's probably too difficult. It is a little tricky because some pages have a ton of text and some of them only have 10 words. And if they're 5 out of the 10 words are wrong, that's way too difficult. So you're looking, just to give you a more concrete number of about, you want your child to read about 90% or 9 out of every 10 words correct.
Awesome. This one I'm going to give to Miriam too, because she talked about sight words. So just mentioning, I've recently come across some educators who advocate for orthographic mapping, and I know Miriam's going to talk about what that is as a way of learning those sight words. And what she shared may have been interpreted as something different, but Miriam, do you want to elaborate?
A great question. And so that strategy of see, say, spell, where the child sees the word that you've written and they hear you say it, and then they say the word and the letters, and then they spell it or they write it, that actually supports that orthographic mapping. And orthographic mapping simply means we want children to recognize that word as a whole. Well, recognize that word automatically. It's not a great definition of it, but simply that we want children, when they see, let's say, the letters O-F, which is the word of, when they see O-F, they have a map in their brain of O-F. I know that says of, I don't need to sound it out. So we're really trying to help children. Sometimes we use the language of automatize or quickly recognize. And when they can do that, that tells you they've mapped the word in their brain. So that process that I quickly spoke to, that actually does support that orthographic mapping of those sight words.
Awesome. The next question, I'm not sure I'm going to capture it perfectly, but I was wondering how long kids should read out loud. And I'm assuming that that's in one sitting. So your child's practicing how long they should practice for. And how do I choose a book that matches their level of reading? So I'll go to the second part first. Again, if you think about that golden rule of the 5-finger rule, a really great way, if they pick up a text and they're making maybe 5 up, maximum 5 mistakes, that's their limit, basically. And again, that's okay if you're sitting there supporting them, working through it with them together, then that's all right. If you're expecting them to read a text where they are making 5 mistakes and there's only 30 words on the page, that's an awful lot of mistakes and it's going to get really frustrating fast. So look at the text, get them to read a little bit, and that usually you can sense how difficult this is by how many miscues they make and so on. In terms of reading aloud, remember, reading is super complex. It takes a lot of brain power. So this is not something that they're probably going to be able to do for ever, like for long, long periods of time. We usually say 15 minutes max. That's my rule, is 15 minutes max, just because think of how much focused concentration that takes to put all of those bubbles together and make it all work. Anything else to add to that, Miriam?
No, I think that was great, Michelle.
Okay.
Next one speaks to audiobooks, that this person has had some success with audiobooks with their child, which is amazing. Are there any other ways to motivate a child to actually pick up a book in the age of streaming services? A great question. I'm hoping maybe that slide that we spoke briefly to around motivation gave you some ideas there about sharing the load, doing it together, making it a family affair, trying to get your child into a series or a certain author. Anything else that you want to add to that one, Michelle?
Just that I think that audiobooks can be an incredible tool, but I think that what we did in our own household was when our daughter was listening to the audiobook, she actually had the physical book in her hand and she was following along with the text. Because then if you think about it, what you're doing is you're again practicing all of those skills again and again. So they're getting reinforced. And yet they still get the theme and they get the characters and all of that complex thought that goes with it. So yeah, I think if you pair the two together, it would be great. And again, I've seen it where it transfers to eventually they get that motivation where they really want to actually pick up the book on their own or go back to it. Listen to that book as an audiobook first, or as you read the book first, and let them have that book and go back to it, because they will open that book back up again. Okay. Anything? What's next, Miriam?
So the next one, it's actually a similar area. So my child loves to listen to audiobooks or listen to me read to them. It sounds like they might struggle a little bit with that decoding, which we see often, and it seems to slow them down, so they don't like to read themselves. How can I encourage my child to read, to be a more efficient reader? What are some of the decoding strategies, I think, is what this person is asking. So hopefully, at least at the beginning, some of those strategies you can do with your child. So just a little bit of letter sound practicing, some practicing with syllables, some sight words. Those are often, that can be a really good support to being able to decode. And I also think, depending on the grade that your child is in and the level they're reading at, pick some of those easier books at the beginning. So ones that they will be really successful in, ones that they'll read quickly, they'll read with fluency, that they'll understand, just to build up some confidence from the get-go. Because again, and I think this, you're alluding to this too, the person who asked this question, you want it to be a positive experience and a joyful experience. And when it is frustrating, it's no fun for anyone.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move into that next column. How do I best work with my child's teacher to stay aligned and on the same page? Such a great question, and really important too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say we do know that consistency is helpful, right? So one of the things is to have those conversations with the teacher. How, what kind of language even are you using in the classroom? If you're talking about reading strategies, what are you talking about, so that I can sort of use those same prompts or same cues as at home as well. It's great to expand on them too. That doesn't hurt. But if you can keep this same consistent language, then the child doesn't interpret it as two different things, right? It's just reinforcing things. Anything else, Miriam?
I think that's perfect. I do see there's a question. So sorry about this. They can't find the slideshow presentation. Maybe I'll share my screen and just walk everyone through how to do that again. So when you click on the bit.ly, and maybe Emily or Michelle, you could post the bit.ly, awesome, in the chat again. So when you click on that bit.ly link, this is the folder it's going to take you to. And you'll see we did a kindergarten to grade 2 session last month. So you're welcome to click into here, but for the slides for tonight, you're going to go to our 3 to 6 session. And if you open that up, you'll see there's a few resources. And actually for me at the very bottom, it says slides and then help my child is struggling to read 3 to 5. If you click on there, you have access to all of the slides in here. So I'm hopeful that that's a little bit more help. Sorry for the confusion. We wanted to share lots of resources with you, but sometimes too many resources can become a little bit confusing. So hopefully that's a little bit more clear.
Perfect. The next one has to do with, how do I slow down my child's reading out loud when they race ahead, knowing the words, but not focusing on the punctuation? So there's a couple of tips and tricks to do that. One, we know that if children track, it actually slows their eye movement down and slows their attention down a bit. So sometimes that's helpful for those racy readers. The other thing, so tracking with their fingers. Thank you, Miriam. So following, and here's the thing, when you tell your child to track, they actually have to point to the word that they are saying, because kids get really sneaky and good at just tracking across the page, but it has nothing to do with the words that are coming out of their mouth. We want the two to connect. We want them to see the words that they're pointing at as they say them, right? Multiple points of input and output. There we go. The other piece of that is an interesting thing where you can talk about what a big word for it is called prosody. And that is, when you read, it's not just about reading the words quickly, it's about making the words make the most sense possible, or reading with expression. So that's what punctuation does, right? When you have a question mark at the end of a long sentence, what it does is it tells the reader to put their voice up at the end. Miriam, do you like the color blue? Right? And so when I practice that can help the child understand that it's actually to express meaning. It's to make meaning of the text. And how can I be like an actor and make that happen? I don't describe that very well.
No, that was great. One other thing too that you can do is read it first and model it. So, that was great. You read all of those words on the page. I want it to sound like this. And then you take the book, you read it. If it's questions, if there's exclamation points, if there's capitals, just attending to that punctuation, show them what a really strong reader would sound like, and then give them the book back and have them practice. And that's another support to prevent some of that racing ahead, but to also draw your child's attention to that punctuation, because it does play such an important role. Oh, we have a good question here. Recommend some great books for grades 3 and 4. And I wonder, Emily, not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if the library has some book lists for around that age group.
Absolutely. I know that both Calgary and Edmonton post lots of great recommended books that have been selected by library staff. I can post a link to where you can find them on both of our websites. I'll dig that up right now.
Amazing. And Michelle and I will take you up on that offer too. We're always looking for good book lists. That's helpful.
That would be fabulous. The next one, do you recommend a word ladder as a good exercise to increase the child's vocabulary? So for those people who don't know what a word ladder is they take a topic and then a lot of words that might be around it. Well, there's actually different things. So I'm going to talk about it as a word gradient, sort of, where you might have all the words between hot and cold, and then they sort of move up in more hot or more cold, depending on which way you go. So it might be, it is cool, it's crisp, it's freezing, it's chilly, and you have to figure out how you can put them in order. That type of exercise is fabulous, because what they are doing is, number one, they're linking all of those words together. They're making connections between all of those words that are similar, but they have small nuances. So that's one thing. Two, you have to do it as a discussion, right? So that you're actually talking with someone else. So the child's not just memorizing it and doing it on their own, but the power in doing something like that is actually in the discussion with another person and negotiating why and the nuances of the words. There are different types of vocabulary ladders though. So Miriam, did you have anything else to say about vocabulary ladders? That's what I think you mean when you talk about vocabulary ladders.
Yes, that's my interpretation as well. And if that's the case, they are incredible at building vocabulary for multiple reasons that Michelle spoke to. One of the most beneficial is that conversation. So if you have, a list of words that maybe you've brainstormed with your child or you found on the internet. You can find some online between like the hottest word to the coldest word. Don't have your child sort them by themselves. Do it with you, or as they're sorting, have them explain to you, why did you put the word chilly, or why did you put the word freezing closer to cold than chilly? What do you think the difference is? No, that's such a great strategy. I'm so glad that person asked that.
Awesome. And then there is a fabulous question, difficult to answer.
Yep.
So there, obviously, we presented a ton of strategies tonight. You can't do them all the time as a parent. That's impossible. It's crazy making. So what do I do? What are the top 2 or 3 strategies or important aspects that I really want to focus in on? So Miriam, I'm gonna throw that one to you first, and then I'll tell you. We also have our biases, I think, a little bit too. So
definitely. I think I would put number 1 as talking before, during, and after reading. It's just such a great way to build language, to help children understand, to help them make connections while they read. I would focus on as much talking as possible. That's where I'd start. Where would you go from there, Michelle?
Yeah, well, obviously, being all about oral language, talk is big on my list too. I also think I'd look at my child, because think of those 3 bubbles and think about, what is it that my child needs most right now? Is it that they really are struggling with that word recognition? And I want to be really careful here, because that does not mean that we forget about the other 2 bubbles. Or is it that they're struggling a little bit more with understanding? And so that's what I'm going to focus on. But I think listening to your child and through talking and through listening to them read and talking about what they're reading, you get a sense of maybe where they need to do a little bit more work, where we need to beef it up a bit, and areas of strength. So yeah, I think talk is really big, but also listening to your child and figuring out, where do you think are you going to get the most bang for your buck right now?
I agree. Yeah.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for staying on a little bit and tackling those questions. I am so impressed that you guys got through them all. That was so wonderful. We really appreciate it. I want to do a really quick shout out to the family literacy kits that are available at Calgary Public Library, and also about the family book club that's available through Edmonton Public Library. These are both wonderful resources that support that family literacy. And just a final big thank you to Miriam and Michelle. Your expertise is so amazing, and we just really appreciate you sharing it with both our libraries today.
Thank you for having us. We love it, and we are so happy so many parents are interested in helping their child and supporting their child and building a love of reading.
Thank you for having us. It's always a pleasure. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. I know it's almost 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, so we are just grateful that you are here.
Thanks everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.